Shabbat Shalom. The very last Torah reading that my distinguished predecessor, Rabbi Milton Steinberg, ever read in his lifetime was this week, Parshat Pekudei. Of all of my predecessors, Rabbi Lincoln, who honors us with his presence here today, Rabbi Nadich of blessed memory, Rabbi Steinberg was perhaps the most tragic of all, in the sense that he died at the age of 46 in 1950, having suffered from a debilitating heart condition which would, of course, ultimately become terminal, dying just prior to his son's bar mitzvah. And as I've been reading about Rabbi Steinberg with this parsha in mind, it occurred to me, of all the unfinished commitments, responsibilities, and achievements of his life, the books he would have written, the institutions he would have led, the philosophies, and in the biography by Simon Novak, it describes one particular moment of Rabbi Steinberg's final week. And it describes, I'll quote from Novak, it says, Steinberg did give a good deal of thought to one congregational matter, the possibility of a new community house and better facilities for the religious school. During the war years that followed, a sizable sum of money had been accumulated for the purpose. It had not been used, and the board never succeeded in finding a suitable location. Steinberg urged the board, just before he died, to allocate the sum of $4,000, it's inflation, required for a set of plans. Steinberg, as we know, would never see that building built, what we would come to know as the Steinberg House, established in March of 1952, 2 years following his passing. And so, as I think of this story, I think of what Steinberg must have been thinking as he lay on his deathbed reading this week's Parsha. Because it describes a moment when Moses, having chapter after chapter, a full third of the book of Exodus, describing the establishment of the Mishkan, the desert tabernacle in which God's presence would dwell in, over and over again, Moses is in charge of the plans, he's in charge of the design, he's in charge of the contributions that Lana spoke so beautifully about. Every single aspect of its construction, Moses again and again is working to build and working to complete. And at the very end, it's established, V'hukam hamishkan, and it says, Vayachal Moshe et hamlacha, and Moses finished the entire work, and a cloud of God's glory descends upon it, ukvod Hashem maleh et hamishkan, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And then comes a verse that you're not expecting, the verse that Moses certainly wasn't seeing coming. Velo yachol Moshe lavo el ohel moed. And Moses could not enter into the tabernacle, the very tabernacle that Moses had spent his entire life working towards, arguably the very point of liberation itself, to build a house that God's presence would be able to dwell. All of Moses' energies, all of that which Moses worked for, here at this moment of completion, of reaching his dream, Moses has said, no, you are not going to enter the Mishkan, you are not going to enter that very thing that you worked for so long, for so many years. It is not your achievement to take part of, to enter and sense God's blessing. It must have been a sense of emotional whiplash of the first order to have worked so hard towards something and only to find that it wasn't his to be had. And we know it's not just here, but Moses' life is peppered with these incidents again and again and again. We know the scene at the golden calf as he's talked God down from the proverbial ledge, and he asks, can I just, God, see your presence? And what does God say to Moses? No one may see my presence and live, not even you, Moses. And of course, the whole journey of the 40 years, standing toe-to-toe with Pharaoh, the plagues, the 40 years through the desert, all in order to get to the promised land. And what does God say to Moses when he arrives? It's not for you, Moses, to enter into the promised land. All of your labors, all that which you worked for, you, Moses, are not going to enter into the land. And it's here where we get an insight into our greatest leader, our greatest prophet, Moshe Rabbeinu. Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, the great 18th century commentator on the Torah, says at this moment, when Moses, that I spoke of, is not permitted to enter into the sanctuary which he built, he writes, Moses' work, it was not Moses' work, not his relationship to the divine laws which had found expression in the Mishkan. It was the nation by this sanctuary had prepared a home for the Torah, and it was for the nation for whom God allowed his glory to enter into the home for the Torah on this earth. Meaning that all that Moses did, all that he worked for, he was being reminded by God again and again and again that it was not for him, it was not for his glory, Moses, but rather it was for the people. It was for those who would come after him, for which he labored. It wasn't his tabernacle. It wasn't his promised land. His life, his labors were a mere prologue for a story that would extend well beyond his own life. A teacher of mine, a mentor of mine, about whom I've spoken many times from the pulpit, my Hillel director, Rabbi Michael Brooks, he's not a rabbi, Michael Brooks, who taught me more about Jewish leadership than anyone else, has a list of principles, which sometimes I think he changes just to play with me. But his 11th principle of Jewish leadership is, if we want to leave a legacy, it cannot be about us. If we want to leave a legacy, it cannot be about us. There is an inescapable fact of our own mortality. Some of us are extended a great length of years. Some of us, our lives are cut short early. But all of us know that we labor in our own lives and we ask ourselves, for what purpose do we build buildings? For what purpose do we develop businesses? For what purpose do we plant trees? For what purpose do we raise families? Why do we labor so in this world the way we do? Do we do it for ourselves? The message of the Parsha is no. It's not for ourselves for which we labor. We do it in order to arrive at a point when we can see our shadows extend well beyond the horizons of our own life. Because all of us know that whether it is by our own choosing or inevitably not by our own choosing, it cannot be for vanity. It cannot be driven by what we hope to achieve in our own lifetimes. The things we labor for have to extend well beyond our years. Whether it's the buildings, whether it is the books, whether it's the children we raise. After all, if we do our jobs right, then what do we hope for our children? That they leave home. A successful parenting job is knowing that our children leave home, and if they don't, then somehow we've failed in that task. The limit and length of our days is not of our own choosing, but we all know, like Mary Poppins, one day when the work is done, we need to fly away, knowing of our successes. There's a story that's relayed in Nikos Kazantzakis' novel Zorba the Greek. And the tale goes that one day the young Zorba traveled some distance to arrive in a place far away, in a little village, and he stumbled upon an old grandfather figure of some 90 years old who was busy planting an almond tree. And the young Zorba stopped and exclaimed, "What, Granddad, are you doing? Planting an almond tree?" Presumably, the young Zorba was mystified at the sight of seeing an old man seeding a future that he may very well now not live to see. And bent over as he was, the old man turned to the young Zorba and said, "My son, I carry on as if I should never die." To which the young Zorba replied, "And I carry on as if I was going to die at any minute." Shall we live our lives as if we're never going to die? Or shall we live our lives as if we are going to die any minute? The Jewish tradition splits the difference. The famous passage in the Talmud spoken of the sage Honi Hamagal, when he's asked the same question, the old man replies, "I'm planting a seed because I found already grown carob trees in this world. And just as my forefathers planted these trees for me, so too I plant these trees for my own children." The blessings of our own lives come by way of the heroic gestures of our predecessors, without whom we ourselves would not be here. As Rabbi Tarfon taught in the Mishnah, "Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, velo ata ben chorin lehibatel mimenu." It's not incumbent upon us to complete the task, but we cannot desist from trying. It's not incumbent upon us to complete the task, nor for that matter, I would add, is it possible for us to complete the tasks. All of our lives will be, given our mortality, by definition, unfinished portraits, compositions in need of completion by future generations. So let's plant the seeds, let's build the buildings, let's write the books, and let's raise our children, not for us, but for generations to come. We can act now, all the while we can look long beyond the horizon of our existence. Whether or not we ourselves enter that promised land, may all of our actions be taken to see and fulfill the promises that long preceded us, and may all of our actions be taken with an eye to a world well beyond our own lives. Amen.